So we just started the live stream. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Hopefully, inshallah, today we'll be continuing. Sorry for all the coughing, but inshallah, I'll try to avoid it as much as I can. But let me just go over some of the things that we talked about last time. So we went over these slides, and just a reminder, remember these slides can actually be found on this website. And I gave it to you before, but I'm going to do it again. I'm going to show you how you can actually find them. And the website is basically aishawaswas.wordpress.com. And guess what? I actually managed to find a way to get access to the actual page, and that way I can edit some things. Anyhow, so this is the family fiqh. Basically, hit family fiqh on that website, aishawaswas.wordpress.com, and then you would get access to all the slides. So that really makes it easy for you. So the slide that we are doing today is basically going to be this slide, and which is called qualifications and engagement. So you'll find it on that website. So qualifications and engagement, and inshallah, we're going to be talking about a couple things today. Okay, let's just first, before we talk about the qualifications and engagement, kind of get over like a review what we did last time. Last time we did this slide, the women men cannot propose to, and we basically had it in 3 or 4 categories. And we said women due to blood relations, which is the mother, the grandmother, the great-grandmother, and so forth. So we're going upwards, basically, in ancestry. And then we said the sisters, whether we're talking about the full sisters, that is called shaqiqa, meaning they share mother and father. And that's the sister that or the sibling. Shaqiq would be for a brother that they share mother and father with, and shaqiqa would be the sister that is a full sister, basically sharing mother and father together. There's a ukht li'um, which basically means a sister from the mother's side, and basically means that they would share only the mother, and a sister from the father's side, they would only share the father. And of course, for the adopted brother or sister, you could see it's not included, but then we would be, of course, talking about milk relations. That's a different story. And in terms of blood relations, so we said full sisters, let's see, sister to from the mother's side, and sister from the father's side. And then, of course, we would be talking about the daughters for the brothers, and the daughters for the sisters. Those would be nieces. So whether we're speaking about the brother's daughters or the sister's daughters, those would be also mahram that he cannot get married to. Now, there are, in terms of blood relations, there are mahrams, including the aunts. So we're talking about the aunts, the paternal aunts or maternal aunts. As for the paternal and maternal aunts' daughters, they are not included in the blood relations. Just remember that one. They're not included in the blood relations. I know that in the Western culture that marrying a cousin is considered at least somewhat of like an incest, but not in Islam. In Islam, it is not whatsoever considered as haram. In the Jewish and Hindu culture, the uncle, maternal uncle, is not considered a mahram. So in the Jewish and Hindu culture, they're not considered mahrams. In Islam, they are considered mahram. So il-khal in the Jewish culture and also the Hindu culture, the girl can actually marry her maternal uncle, but not in Islam. Okay, just a little, just a little, I guess, emphasis on some things because many people would ask in that regards. The other part is the marital relations. Marital relations, every single woman that is married is going to be considered as temporarily muharram or mahram, or basically forbidden that anybody would propose to her or even get married to her, of course, because in Islam polyandry is not permissible. Okay, so it's different than a man marrying more than one woman. Okay, now the other thing I would want to say about marital relations, we're going to talk about two types. We talked about two types of muharramat. We said there's one that is permanent and there's one that is temporary. And we said temporary would be one, every woman that is married is basically considered temporarily forbidden for anybody to propose to her and for anybody to get married to her, of course. And we also said temporary would be the wife's sisters and the wife's aunts, maternal aunts and paternal aunts and sisters. Okay, what does that mean? So the man that she's married to cannot propose to or cannot marry temporarily basically the wife's sisters, whether we're talking about whether we're speaking about sisters from the mother's side, or whether we're talking about sisters from the father's side, or whether we're speaking about full sisters, meaning sharing mother and father. So that would not be permissible. Okay. But even engagement, even just engagement, that's also not permissible. Okay. And same thing with the aunts. So whether we're speaking about maternal aunts or paternal aunts, the husband cannot have them as co-wives, whether the sisters or basically the woman's aunts, they cannot be co-wives to basically the woman that the man is married to. Okay. We also talked about in terms of marital relations, we said due to marital relations, the husband is not permitted to marry the wife's mother and her grandmother and her great grandmother as far as it goes. Okay. And we also talked about something called Rabiba. What is a Rabiba? A Rabiba is basically the wife's daughter from another marriage. Okay. That is a Rabiba. But I promised that I would talk about Rabiba, and let me talk about it right now. In terms of a Rabiba, maybe I should get that ayah out so you could see what exactly I'm talking about in terms of Rabiba. And definitely this ayah right now, is a must to see in order for us to talk about it. And this ayah basically happens to be in Surah An-Nur. Okay, all the ones that I had included and talked about in terms of Muharramat is basically in Surah An-Nur. Let's go to Surah An-Nur and just see that ayah to basically emphasize it and let you see it. And hopefully we could just get an idea about what we're talking about. Okay, let's see, it's in this ayah. Okay, now you see it. وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يغضضن من أبصارهن ويحفظن فروجهن. So this is Surah An-Nur, like you could see. It's ayah 31. Let's see what this ayah is saying. Okay, tell the believing women to lower from their gaze and to guard their private parts and not to reveal their beautification except what normally appears. And let them cover with their covering, basically, because بخمورهن الخمار is not only a head covering. الخمار is basically the covering that covers from head to the bottom to cover their bosom. So al-juyub is basically the breast area, and they should not reveal their beautification except to their husbands, their spouses, basically, to their fathers, which basically means her father, her grandfather, her great-grandfather, etc. Okay, that's why it says آبائهم. It's like, well, wait a minute, I only have one father. But when it says it in plural, that's basically to include and consider that your grandfather is also your father. Okay. أو آباء بعولتهن. Now you could see that this is a relationship in terms of blood relations, but this one is in terms of marital relations. The fathers of their husbands. Is the father, in other words, the father-in-law, is he permanently going to be not permissible for the woman to get married to? Yes, this person is going to be permanently a mahram for the woman, even if the husband divorces the wife. Permanently, he can never get married to that woman. In other words, even if it is his ex's, his son's ex, okay? أو أبنائهن, or their sons. أبنائهن, who are we talking about there? أبنائهن, like they cannot get married to their own sons, or the sons of their husband's sons, basically. So if my husband basically is married to another, or was married to another woman, or is married to another woman, basically the children that belong to my husband, they would all be mahram to me, and they could never get married to me whatsoever, even if a divorce were to happen. أو إخوانهن, or their brothers. So a woman can never get married to her brothers, whether we're speaking about full brothers or whether we're speaking about half brothers. Half to mean from the mother's side or from the father's side. أو بني إخوانهن, or the children of their brothers or the children of their sisters. So basically nephews. أو نسائهن, the part about nisaihin, or their women. So this was actually a place of question in terms of, okay, we're talking about the Muslim women here, but then what if we're speaking about non-Muslim women? Is a Muslim woman permitted to take off her hijab in front of a Hindu woman, in front of a Jewish woman, in front of a Christian woman, in front of a pagan woman? There are differences of opinions between scholars. In fact, even if we're talking about Muslim women, it is conditional that they would be what is called mu'tamanat. Let me explain the word mu'tamanat for a bit. The word mu'tamanat, mu'taman, actually means that you would trust their integrity to not describe you to other men, and not basically use the information about your appearance or your appearance, of course, without hijab, and use it in any way that is not basically permitted in Islam. So nisaihin is this, considering that this is talking about women that are having religious integrity, whether Muslim women or not Muslim women. So this is the place of differences of opinions between scholars. Majority of the scholars regarded that you can uncover in front of non-Muslim women only if they had the religious integrity, or at least within their culture, they recognize that it is not appropriate to describe you without your hijab in front of non-mahrams of yours. In other words, they respect your choices. But if they do not, then do not take off your hijab in front of them. أو ما ملكت أيمانهن. ملكت أيمانهن, we're speaking about certainly the slaves when they were there, of course. But it's important to remember, just on a side, I know this doesn't exist anymore, two things whenever we speak about slavery. Number one is definitely what I always say, Jonathan Brown's book. And Jonathan Brown's book about slavery, I said it was one of the best written. Definitely a high recommend. Number two, in terms of slave women, it's important to remember that it was considered as a marriage method, at least from the owner to the woman. So it wasn't the brothers and the sons and everybody sharing that bondswoman. Absolutely not. That was considered a marriage relationship, only the master. Is the woman, if she were to buy a male slave, is she capable of saying this is milk al-yamin? The answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not. So the woman master, the female master, even if she were to buy a male slave, that would not be considered a milk yamin, in the same way that if a husband were to, if a man were to be considered as buying a milk yamin. Okay. أو التابعين أو التابعين غير أولي الإربة. What is التابعين غير أولي الإربة? They're basically the children, the boys, the young boys that غير أولي الإربة من الرجال, basically. They're basically the young boys that did not yet develop puberty, did not reach the age of puberty. In other words, they're within, let's call it the area. We're not talking about very young boys. What we're talking about that within this stage of what we would consider as early puberty that still did not show signs. So we're talking about in Asian countries, we're speaking about perhaps maybe age 10, age 11, where this is pre-puberty, not yet showing signs of puberty, but we could see early signs of sprout of puberty, then those are the kids that are included in here. So signs of early puberty would be for boys. You could see some mustache trying to show right there, probably a couple hairs on the chin right there. Those are actually within puberty. Final stage would be a full beard, would be, of course, you could see a man right there in terms of height, in terms of, I guess, facial hair, bodily hair, in terms of voice changes. We know basically that that is considered as a complete man, even if we're talking about 5 stages of puberty. So we're talking about stage 3, perhaps, that's within considered the age of full puberty, at least starting full puberty. Okay, they don't have to reach stage 5 until they reach 18 years of age. No, once they show signs of early puberty, that's when it would be considered a person that is considered a person that a woman should not be taking her hijab in front of them. Same thing if we're talking about within this التابعين غير أولي الإربة من الرجال. I want you to look at this one. So we're speaking about 2. We're speaking about الطفل الذين لم يظهروا على عورات النساء, and we're talking about التابعين غير أولي الإربة من الرجال. So we're talking about some men here, okay? We're talking about some men here that may have, let's call it a dysfunction. Let's call it basically something like erectile dysfunction. They are basically having some illness that is basically making them incapable of getting married. Okay, let's just say it that way. And what it would be described as basically erectile, not only dysfunction, but we're talking about a complete one. Okay. So those would be what it would be meant. In other words, they don't have any desire for women. And this isn't for a man to say, I have no desire. No. This is talking about a procedure that we would know. The doctors basically said this person is infertile. This person is not only infertile, but basically has a dysfunction, an erectile dysfunction. Infertile is not included in here. Okay, just because this person is infertile does not make them incapable of making intimacy. Okay, الطفل الذين لم يظهروا على عورات النساء. That's basically the child that yet did not hit the age of puberty, but they're actually within that, like I said, 10, 11. They're not showing signs of puberty, but you could see that they're getting there. You could see maybe larger bone mass. Perhaps you could see some features changing, jaw changing, jaw growing. You could see some signs of that changes. You could sometimes see the bone, the voice starting to show some changes, a little bit of more hair growing, not really the major ones. Usually the main hair grows. We're talking about pubic area, we're talking about underarms later on, of course, but those are, and also a little bit of the mustache, but that's basically hitting puberty. So we're talking about pre-puberty here. Okay, so those would be but on a condition. لم يظهروا على عورات النساء. In other words, unlike many times today, because of social media, because of all that big gaming, all of that, that's basically exposing women's features, then in that situation, we certainly have to be really careful if those children had been exposed to recognize certain features and certain, let's just call it as sexualizing women, etc. Then in that situation, if this child is recognizing these features and recognizing them as somehow exotic, then in that situation, this child is not included, even if they did not hit puberty. So that would be around 10 years old, maybe it could even include 9, 8. If they had been exposed to these things, then do not uncover your hijab in front of them. ولا يضربن بأرجلهن ليعلم ما يخفين من زينتهن. When you look at ولا يضربن, I want you to look at this one. So it's quite interesting because it was related to a previous culture. Their culture was basically, in a way, in order to bring attraction, they would wear these anklets. But these anklets would have bells on them. It wasn't necessarily like the bells that you would see, as church bells, but no, it would be something like that. So it would have like a little ball, and it would basically be chains and some chains on it, in order for her, every time that she would walk, it would basically make like a dancing and a harmony, a dancing sound, a harmony, in order to grab attention. So that was basically bringing in this type of attraction to show that she's a woman, basically attractive, basically looking good, whatever it is. Okay, so this ayah had forbid that women would wear these anklets, because Islam considered that even the sound of beauty is not permitted onto the Muslim woman to wear, let alone the appearance. Even the sound of beauty was not permitted. Just keep that one in mind. We're not talking about the actual beauty yet. She's just wearing the sound of beauty. She's wearing full hijab, but she has the anklets. Okay, the anklets were just to draw attention, but she's wearing her hijab. Even the sound of beauty was considered as not permissible and not be fit for a Muslim woman to wear. Just keep that one in mind. In other words, even if we're to talk about all the different types of beautification that many women would put, whether high heels or probably because the high heels, the whole thing about the high heels, it was really meant to bring a certain posture, a certain position. It's in order to elevate certain features within the body, to basically expose them in a certain way. And that's why the high heels would basically fit. It basically fits within that. It does not befit a hijabi woman to wear high heels in public. Doesn't fit hijab. Hijab is supposed to be lowering, basically, and reducing all that beautification to make sure that it does not get exposed in that way. Okay. So لِيُعْلَمَ مَا يُخْفِينَ مِنْ زِينَتِهِنْ. So that was not permitted, to basically expose. Okay, Okay, I'm confused here because it says, okay, here we go. So all of that is not permitted to appear. وَتُوبُوا إِلَى اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا أَيُّهَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. And تُوبُوا إِلَى اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا أَيُّهَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, and do the tawbah. But there's another surah that I wanted to actually mention right there, which basically, hold on. Okay, I want. Okay, wanted you to look at this one because this is actually important to look at this ayah. حرمت عليكم أمهاتكم وبناتكم وأخواتكم. Okay, I want you to look at this one. This one is actually in Surah An-Nisa, ayah 23. Let me take you to that ayah really quick. Okay, wanted to, where's, oh dear, where is it? Okay, here we go. I'm going to take you to ayah Surah An-Nisa, ayah 23. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Oh, subhanAllah, we got it right there. Let me get to it, inshallah. Okay, here we go. I want you to look at this ayah. حرمت عليكم أمهاتكم وبناتكم وأخواتكم وعماتكم وخالاتكم. So in the same order, the ones that are not for or permitted for you to get married to and are forbidden are your mothers. So we're speaking about mothers, we're speaking about mothers to mean your own mother. We're speaking about great-grandmother. We're speaking about grandmother, etc. Those are called ummahat. Banatukum, your daughters. So we're speaking about your daughters, your granddaughters, your great-granddaughters, etc. That's banatukum. That's why it came in the plural form. Bint is one, banat is plural. So when it says banatukum, this is talking about all what would be considered as daughters. Akhawatukum, your sisters, whether those were the whether those are the full sisters that you share mother and father with, we call them shaqiqa, or whether your sisters basically through your mom or through your dad. Ammatukum, your maternal aunts, paternal aunts, we talked about that one. Khalatukum, il-ammat is basically the paternal aunts. Khalatukum is the maternal aunts. Banatul akh, basically the brothers daughters. Banatul ukht, the daughters, the sisters' daughters, basically the nieces, okay, the nieces from the brother's side, the nieces from the sister's side. Ummahatukum allati arda'nakum. So you could see this was actually talking about what we had said and called in the slide as as the blood relations. Now this is including ummahatukum allati arda'nakum, your mothers that had nursed you, and we call them milk relations. And we said whatever that milk relations, what the blood relations would consider as basically haram, we basically said the same would go in terms of milk relations. So whether we're speaking about the mother that nursed you, your sisters that nursed you, and certainly then we would go into the other type of relations, which is through marital relations. So now your wife's mother, your wife's mothers. So this is talking about your wife's mothers in terms of her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, up until forever, if you can get as long as you can, okay, all those women would be considered mahram. رَبَائِبُكُمُ اللَّاتِي فِي حُجُورِكُم. That's the one I wanted to talk about in details. The rabiba is one. What is a rabiba? A rabiba is the wife's daughter. The wife's daughter, if let's say the wife was married to another man and she had a daughter, okay, and then that situation, that would be a rabiba. Yet, it's worthy of mention that scholars had differences of opinions on this rabiba. scholars had differences of opinions on this Rabiba, whether in order for her to fit the Rabiba description, what does that mean? So all scholars would agree that in order for this girl to forever not marry this man that her mother's married to, that all it takes is basically the marriage to be consummated. Okay? All that it takes is the marriage to be consummated, then this man becomes her mahram forever. What we mean by consummated, we're speaking about not only a marriage contract, but we're talking about an actual relationship happening. Okay? We're talking about an actual relationship happening. That man will be forever her mahram. Yet, it's important to mention, does she take her hijab in front of him or not? There are differences of opinions between scholars. Let me lay them out. The first opinion basically said that as long as this was a valid marriage, then in that situation, this girl, whether she is 29 years old or whether she is 5 years old, she would be considered a Rabiba. That's the first opinion. The second opinion said, no, not if she is grown and had reached the age of puberty, she would be considered a Rabiba only if she was basically young and under the age of puberty when the marriage took place. In other words, this man had seen this girl as developing in her basically puberty and developing in her in his own household. So that's the second opinion, that it would be considered before the age of puberty. She would be considered as a Rabiba and permitted to take off her hijab. So they differentiated between a woman that he's not allowed to get married to and a Rabiba that she's permitted to take off her hijab in front of. The third opinion basically considered that, no, we're not talking about a girl within, because remember, puberty for girls basically goes, and boys basically goes through 5 different stages. So we're speaking about early stages. Some scholars considered that, no, if we're talking about early stages, that's considered within this gray area. We want her to wear her hijab in front of him. So the scholars that considered that, we're talking about Rabiba to be the very young girl, and therefore this girl growing up in front of his own eyes. She was 2 when her mother got married to this man, and to him this was like his own daughter. Okay, that's a Rabiba. Okay, now Rabiba, scholars had differences of opinions, like I had mentioned in that, and what I would recommend, and I would say that it's a considerable opinion and a strong considerable opinion. The scholars that had said that she would not be a Rabiba if she had hit the age of puberty already after the marriage contract. What makes me say that? What makes me say that is there is a very important legal maxim in Islam. It's called Sadd al-Dhara'i. Let me explain that one. Sadd al-Dhara'i means that we are supposed to be closing the means of evil. The one that considered this opinion is Ibn Hazm and many Malikis. Let me explain why they said that. Here's their evidence. They said, "Allati fi hujurikum min nisaikum allati dakhaltum bihin," the women, the raba'ibikum, basically your wife's daughters that were in your own homes. And they said, well, Rabiba, if she hit the age of puberty, the whole idea the whole idea and the whole wisdom behind all of this is for the man to feel like it's his own daughter. But if he gets married to this woman, and here it is, this woman had already hit the age of puberty, he didn't get to see her as his own daughter anymore. And therefore, he may have certain feelings, inclinations towards this really new woman, even if she is considered as, yes, that's my wife's daughter, but he didn't necessarily develop these sentiments to see her as if she was his own daughter. And that's where the Malikis and the Zahiri, Ibn Hazm, they regarded that also not only from the ayah lati fi hujurikum, but they said also from saddan lidhara'i, from the legal maxim of closing the means to evil. And because of the many cases that had come to their basically court and their offices, they said, we need to close that door because people did not build their religious integrity in place. And therefore, because of the many cases, in other words, we look at statistics as well. And I'll tell you, with statistics, stepfathers are more likely in most of the cases of different molestations or different transgression. Let's just leave it with that word, that many men are transgressing the limits, usually comes from the stepfather or stepbrothers and step siblings. Okay, so therefore, these statistics are important to keep in mind and take in place and understand sadd al-dhara'i. If it leads to harm, if it leads to fitna, then Islam will tell you this is 2/3 of the religion and therefore should be taken in consideration, even in understanding and bring this interpretation to the ayah. Okay, فَإِن لَمْ تَكُونُوا دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِنْ. Now, when you look at الَّتِي دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِنْ, this is basically speaking about a full relationship and not just a marriage contract. We're talking about intimacy, we're talking about a consummation of the marriage, and therefore irrabiba. So let us flip the situation around. Let's just say that this man, okay, he basically had a marriage contract with this woman, just a marriage contract. But then the marriage was supposed to be held on, I don't know, October 7th. Okay, I don't know why, but just put October 7th, okay? Okay, on October 7th. Well, the marriage didn't happen on October 7th. It was canceled off. The man decided that he wasn't interested anymore and he wanted to go for her. He actually considered that he wanted to go for the daughter instead. Okay, she reached the age of puberty. He didn't see her the first time. Later, she comes over after the marriage contract. He's like, well, the daughter actually looks more beautiful. And what does he do? He basically cancels off the wedding and decides to propose to the daughter. Okay, can that happen? It can happen. As long as the marriage contract did not get to the stage of basically being intimate with that woman, then this can happen. Let's flip it. Let's say this man was basically supposed to be getting married, and on October 7th, the wedding was supposed to be on October 7th, and he was engaged, and what we would consider engaged to basically the daughter. Okay. But then the wedding didn't happen. It was just a marriage contract. Okay. And then he decided, you know what? The girl is really just a very silly girl. The mother seems wiser. I think she's a better fit for me. So he basically decided that he wants to cancel and basically divorce and cancel the marriage and basically go for the woman. Then we would say absolutely not. Since you had a marriage contract, just the contract, that would make the girl's mother a forever mahram onto this man. Forever mahram onto this man. He can never get married to her, just with the contract. Okay. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُونُوا دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِنْ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْكُمْ. So this is talking about exactly what I'm talking about. If there is no intimacy between the man and the mother in a marriage contract, then in that situation, they can get married to, if there was no intimacy, they can cancel off basically the marriage and cancel off and basically divorce the mother and get married to the daughter. That would be permissible. حلائل أبنائكم الذين من أصلابكم. What is حلائل? حلائل means what is halal. But halal here within this context actually means the wives. So the wives of your sons that are from aslabikum, in other words, your own biological sons. So your own biological sons' wives, you're not permitted to marry them. Okay? وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ, and to combine between the sisters. Okay, so what does it mean to combine between the sisters? In other words, co-wives. You're married to a woman, to marry a second wife, okay, that's permissible. Third wife, that's permissible. Fourth wife, that's permissible. We're not discussing that. But for the second wife to be her sister, that's absolutely haram. To be her aunt, that's absolutely haram. Absolutely. So why? Because the Prophet ﷺ explained it. If you were to do that, you will break and bring about a fracture basically to the bonds and the relationships between the family bond. Why? Because it's more likely to happen that the co-wives would have jealousy, would have some kind of a competition within this marriage, and therefore there's going to be some animosity in between. This is not inevitable, but this is a very high chance. Unless these co-wives basically had, I guess, religious integrity, etc., they'll still have some feelings against each other. But at the end of the day, is that Islam considered sadd al-dhara'a. Sadd al-dhara'a as to close the means of evil. We need to make sure that we prioritize the family bond over a marriage, or probably giving more chances to this woman to get married. Okay. إن الله كان غفورا رحيما. Let's go back to the slides, and that way we could see. So we talked about the blood relations, the marital relations, and we talked about the milk relations because it is mentioned in the hadith, يحرم من الرضاع ما يحرم من النسب. What would be impermissible in the same blood relations and marital relations would basically be considered as part of the milk relations in the same paradigm. Okay, and women, due to certain circumstances, basically she didn't finish her waiting period and so forth. Now I'm going to go for another slide. Let's look at this slide. Qualifications and engagement. Now it's important. Let me make this one bigger, okay? Because I want you to see it okay, here we go. When we talk about qualifications in engagement, it's important to consider there's a difference between what is right, keep that one in mind, what is right and what is valid, okay? We're right now talking about what is valid, not what is right. We're going to get to what is right and what scholars would recommend later. But this one is talking about qualifications in an engagement in general to make it valid. Okay. Now, the first one is Islam and piety. So all the scholars agreed that a Muslim woman may only marry a Muslim man. What's the evidence? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah, وَلَا تَنْكِحُوا الْمُشْرِكَاتِ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنْ وَلَأَمَةٌ مُؤْمِنَةٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكَةٍ وَلَوْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ وَلَا تُنْكِحُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنُوا وَالْعَبْدُ مُؤْمِنٌ خَيْرٌ من مشرك ولو أعجبكم أولئك يدعون إلى النار والله يدعو إلى الجنة والمغفرة بإذنه ويبين آياته للناس لعلهم يتذكرون. So this is the first ayah, 221 from Surah Al-Baqarah. It said, and do not be intimate with the disbelieving women until they believe. And if a bondswoman, that is a believing bondswoman, is better than a mushrika, or a disbeliever, even if she basically was something within your likes. And do not be intimate. Or in fact, I want you to look at this one. I want you to look at the verb and how they differ. I want you to look at this one. This one says tankihu, and this one says tunkihu. What's the difference? This is called a passive voice. What is that indicating? Tunkihu is indicating that someone else is here being talked to, not the actual person. Okay, what does that mean? So this one is talking to the man himself. Do not be intimate, do not marry the women that are not Muslim. Okay, but this one is saying وَلَا تُنْكِحُوا, do not get the men that are not Muslim married. So basically, who's the object here? It's basically the woman. So who's the one that's being talked to here? Who are the words directed at? It's directed at the wali. Okay, why don't you look at this one? It's directed at the wali. So what does that mean? That's to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting the men know, you are the wali, you have to recognize your responsibility in making sure that the lines and the decision making is basically done in the correct way. Okay, now the other ayah, I want you to look at this one. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا جاءكم المؤمنات مهاجرات فامتحنوهن الله أعلم بإيمانهن فإن علمتموهن مؤمنات فلا ترجعوهن إلى الكفار. Let me tell you the story for this ayah. The story for this ayah is that during Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, when was Sulh al-Hudaybiyah? Sulh al-Hudaybiyah was around 5th year Hijrah. Okay, when the Muslims were going for Umrah, Muslims were in Medina, they were going for Umrah. The people of Quraysh, they decided that no, we're not going to allow you to enter Mecca. You're not going to be allowed to go for Umrah. So then, to make the story short, then finally, they had made an agreement between Suhail ibn Amr and the Prophet ﷺ. The agreement was containing one, where anybody that becomes Muslim is going to be returned, basically, if they were to be Muslim from Mecca, they were going to be returned back to Mecca, and that Muslims would not include basically, let's say, the population expansion to include new converts or new reverts from Mecca. If they were to convert to Islam and join the Muslims in Medina, the Muslims in Medina were basically asked to return them to Mecca and not include them within the growing population. Okay, that was one of the agreements. There were other parts of agreement, one of them to go back, not do Umrah this year, come back again, and basically not attack any of their alliances, all of those. That's not my issue here. My issue is that if somebody were to become Muslim, they're supposed to be returning them back to Mecca. Now, that included men and women. But here's what happened. It didn't say that it was including men and women. There was a woman, when the Prophet ﷺ went back to Medina, there was Kulthum bint Utbah. Was it bint Utbah? No, bint Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt, sorry. Bint Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. What did she do? She basically was a teenager, 17, 18 years old, and became Muslim. She ran away from her family because she had become Muslim, and she managed to make it to Medina. Okay? Managed to make it to Medina because Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt, her father, was considered a big deal, was considered a boss, basically, like a chieftain in Mecca. So then he sent two of her brothers after her to Medina in order to get her. Okay. Then when they went to Medina, she basically said, the Prophet attempted to send her with her brothers and told her, well, this was the agreement. And she said, O Prophet of Allah, you cannot include us the way that you would give men as basically the ones to save themselves, protect themselves. It's a completely different dynamic. Men, they can go back, figure themselves out, and basically protect themselves, etc. But for us women, we're basically under we're basically going to be under these brothers, this man, this father, and they're going to force us to get back to their shirk, and we're not going to have the authority to protect our deen. And we would have no way to protect ourselves. So we shouldn't be included in this agreement. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ then got this ayah coming to him, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ مُؤْمِنَاتٌ مُهَاجِرَاتٌ فَامْتَحِنُوهُنَّ. O Prophet of Allah, if the believing women come to you as immigrants, then, and they would come in to say, hey, we're Muslim here, and the ayah says, فَامْتَحِنُوهُنَّ, test them. What are you going to test them with? How are you going to test them? You're going to make them make it the oath. Is it really the reason why you ran away from your family? Is it really because of your Islam? Yes, it is. Okay. Say wallahi. By Allah, I'm only coming here just to protect and preserve my Islam, and that you are Muslim. That's it. Okay. Then Allahu a'lam bi imanihin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the truth about their words. In other words, they're not running away from Mecca in order to, who knows, because she probably had an affair with some guy in Medina. No. That this is the only reason, that it's only because of her Islam. Okay, Allahu a'lam bi imanihin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the truth about their belief. فَإِنْ عَلِمْتُمُوهُنَّ مُؤْمِنَاتٍ. If you knew that they were believing women, then do not return them to the disbelievers. لَهُنَّ حِلٌّ لَهُمْ وَلَهُمْ يَحِلُّونَ لَهُنَّ. I want you to look at this statement. They are not permitted to marry them. Now that means who's they referring to, meaning the disbelievers are not permitted to marry the Muslim women, and the Muslim women are not permitted to marry the disbelievers. So what does that mean? That means any kafir. It did not include Christian or Jewish men. The ayah that basically says اليوم أحل لكم الطيبات وطعام الذين أوتوا الكتاب حل لكم and وطعامكم حل لهم والمحصنات من المؤمنات. This was only directed at men. Okay, what does the ayah say in this one? This ayah, فَلَا تَرْجِعُوهُنَّ إِلَى الْكُفَّارِ, they're not permitted to them. They're not permitted to them, and well, you know what I mean. Okay, both are not permitted to each other. That leaves it within this comprehensive statement. No place in the Quran permitted that a woman would marry a non-Muslim man, whether this man was Christian, whether this man was a Jew, whether this man was a Hindu. It is absolutely impermissible. Therefore, it is an invalid marriage contract. Even if it was done in the civil courts, this is considered zina, period. So when you said Muslim men have an exception, where did you get that from? Let's look at this ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right there in Surah Al-Ma'idah, said, اليوم أحل لكم الطيبات. Today, basically, all the طيبات, all the different طيبات, we talked about this in detail, and the food of the people of the book is permitted to you. Now, when we're speaking about food, we're not talking about pancakes here. We're talking about طعام الذين أوتوا الكتاب. We're talking about the slaughter. Okay, we're not talking about pancakes. We're talking about slaughters here. Okay, وطعامكم حل لهم, and your food is permissible for them to consume. وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ, المحصنات, the bashful women from the believing women, and the bashful women from the people of the book, basically that are from the Christian and from the Jewish women. It is permissible for the Muslim man to marry. Stop for a second. Two conditions. Number one, it said muhsana. What is al-muhsan? The word muhsan can have three meanings. Muhsan can mean married. Muhsan can mean bashful. What is bashful? Bashful means that they don't have any outside of marriage relationships. No boyfriend, no girlfriend. That's a bashful person. Okay? And a muhsan can also mean Muslim. Okay, we're going to get there inshallah some other time. So when you're looking at muhsan here, this is talking about a person, a woman that basically is maintaining her akhlaq. She's maintaining her akhlaq and basically regards any outside. In other words, she's not a woman that believes that, yeah, she can be married to this person and also have a boyfriend. No, that absolutely not. That's not a bashful woman. Okay, now why don't you look at this one? This ayah is only directed at men. Now, Umar ibn al-Khattab, note, Umar ibn al-Khattab ordered Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman. Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman got married to a Jewish woman. Then Umar ibn al-Khattab ordered him to divorce the lady he married. Why? Because he said that if the Muslim men are going to marry the Jewish women and non-Muslim women, then in that situation, we're going to make it a fitna onto the Muslim women to not find spouses because the men are basically getting married to non-Muslim women, and then that would leave out the Muslim women basically having no option because the Muslim men are married to non-Muslim women. So this is something that Umar ibn al-Khattab had considered saddan lidhara'i. That basically supports that piece of sadd al-dhara'i as basically being a legal maxim in Islam. Okay, let's look at this one. Choosing piety as a recommendation. So we talked about Islam, but when you say piety, that's a different level. Piety, what does it mean? Piety means having religious integrity, means taking the religion seriously. That's what piety means. You know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this is haram, you basically take it seriously and you apply it. That's what piety means, righteousness. You don't take the religion like, yeah, I know that's what the religion says, but I'm not going to apply it. Or that's what the religion says, but I'm not ready to apply it right now. Maybe in the future I'll repent. This is not piety. When the ayah says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, this is عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَات. عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَات means they take the religious statements, they take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's boundaries seriously. Okay, now let's look at this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ had basically said, تُنْكَحِ الْمَرْأَ لِأَرْبَعٍ. Women are married for, in other words, chosen in marriage for 4 different reasons. لِمَالِهَا, لِحَسَبِهَا, وَلِجَمَالِهَا, وَلِدِينِهَا. So they're chosen either for their money or for their progeny. In other words, we're talking about ancestry, what family she's coming from, what country, whatever it is, وَلِجَمَالِهَا, and for her beauty, وَلِدِينِهَا, and for her piety, her religion. The Prophet ﷺ said, فَاظْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ. Out of all these different categories, out of all these options and preferences people might have, the Prophet ﷺ is telling you, well, choose piety because taribat yadak. If you don't choose piety, all the other things would basically wear off with time, and you're really left with what? You're really left with turab. You're really left with nothing but soil. In other words, this woman, you got to remember, she's basically made of teen. She's basically made of mud. She's basically made of clay. She's basically, hey, at the end, what remains of this woman right now وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ. The piety is what will elevate you. Same thing. Her money might actually get her, I guess, maybe get into some arrogance. Her hasab, well, basically, you're living with this woman and her family, etc., is going to be either probably getting into this arrogance. Hey, I'm from this family, I'm this. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, or the Prophet is teaching you that, what really remains in this life and the afterlife is really a woman's piety. And certainly it's the same thing for a man. You can get married to a man because of his money, or probably because good looking, or probably because of his family, or probably, for different reasons. But all of that wears off. It wears off, and you're really left with the actual core of that person, which is their deen. Okay, that's why the Prophet ﷺ, in terms of women, he said, إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ. I want you to look at this one. إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ مَنْ تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ. Notice that he's directing his words. He's not telling the ladies. He's not telling the women, if you get a man that's basically, good deen, good akhlaq, then get married to him. No, he was talking to the awliya. He was talking to the fathers. He was talking to the brothers. He was talking to the uncles, basically the wali, whoever falls as the wali at that moment. إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ. If you get basically who you would accept and who you are content with their deen, with their mannerisms, then get them married. And why not? What happens if we don't do that? إِلَّا تَفْعَلُوا تَكُنْ فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ كَبِيرٌ or فَسَادٌ عَرِيضٌ. If you do not do that, then the outcome is basically going to be an increase in basically the lack of mannerism and the corruption within the society. So therefore, the Prophet ﷺ is basically suggesting that. But you want to keep in mind, just because somebody has good deen, that doesn't mean that that's to guarantee that this marriage is going to work out. Why not? Remember, Zainab bint Jahsh was married to Zayd ibn Haritha. Zainab bint Jahsh was married to Zayd. Let me just give you an idea about Zainab bint Jahsh. Zainab bint Jahsh was a Sahabiya, and she was also the Prophet ﷺ's cousin. Okay? She was also the Prophet ﷺ's cousin. So in terms of ancestry, she was considered a noble woman. Zayd ibn Haritha, on the other hand, he was a slave boy, and Hakim ibn Huzam or Khuzam, okay, differences of opinions between scholars, he was Khadija bint Khuwaylid's uncle, that is Hakim, okay? He basically bought Zayd ibn Haritha and gave him as a gift to Khadija bint Khuwaylid, the Prophet's wife. So Zayd ibn Haritha, later, the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija, they agree to adopt him as a son, rather treat him as a slave boy. Sure thing. They adopted him as a son. And it wasn't until later that it was discovered that Zayd ibn Haritha was actually kidnapped from the outskirts of Medina. Okay, he was kidnapped as a young boy, and then later his actual family came. They heard about him, that his actual family came in order to bring him back. The Prophet ﷺ gave Zayd ibn Haritha the option, the option to go back to his family or to stay with the Prophet ﷺ. He basically decides to stay with the Prophet ﷺ. He was approximately 13 years old. So Zayd ibn Haritha was basically the Prophet ﷺ's adopted son, and Zayd ibn Haritha grew up in the household of the Prophet ﷺ. But Zainab bint Jahsh, even though married Zayd ibn Haritha, but the marriage didn't work out, both at the highest level of piety. In fact, Zainab bint Jahsh later, basically Surah Al-Ahzab was to actually speak about Zayd ibn Haritha and to speak about this marriage and that it was basically to bring an end to the culture that a man is not supposed to be marrying the wife of the adopted son, and to bring an end to the whole laws of adoption. Okay, don't want to get into that subject, but even though she was a pious woman, and later the Prophet ﷺ would even endorse her iman, and same thing with Zayd ibn Haritha, but the marriage didn't work out. Same thing if we're talking about Asma bint Abi Bakr as-Siddiq. Asma bint Abi Bakr as-Siddiq, hey, she's the daughter of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. She was married to Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, but they actually had a divorce. We don't know if that was a let's say a revocable divorce, whether he brought her back or not, but at the end there was a case of divorce between Zubayr ibn al-Awwam and Asma bint Abi Bakr. Let me give you an idea about Zubayr ibn al-Awwam. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, pay attention to this one. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, his mother was Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib. What does that mean? The Prophet's paternal aunt. His father was Al-Awwam ibn Khuwaylid, who Khadija bint Khuwaylid's brother. So is Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, his father is Khadija bint Khuwaylid's brother. In other words, Zubayr ibn al-Awwam was actually Khadija's nephew. Okay? And Zubayr ibn al-Awwam is one of the people that was promised Jannah. Okay? Just keep that one in mind. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam was the first one to carry a sword in defense of the Prophet. Asma bint Abi Bakr, who was she? She was the daughter of Bakr as-Siddiq, way older than Sayyidah Aisha, and Asma bint Abi Bakr was one of the early Muslims, and Asma bint Abi Bakr was the one to actually make the meal for the Prophet ﷺ when they ran away with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and the Prophet ﷺ basically fled to Medina. She was her and Aisha, Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anhum, were the only ones to actually know about the Prophet ﷺ fleeing to Medina, sorry. Abu Jahl comes in and Abu Lahab, and they say, where are they? Where did they go? And she basically said, I don't know. And that's when he slapped her so hard to the point that her earrings fell off, and she was disabled from her ear from that slap. Okay, one of her ears, she was basically disabled from it. Okay, now, so having piety is a key recipe, but is a key ingredient, but is not the only ingredient. Okay, so in other words, just because a man is delivering a khutbah, and a man, he's called a shaykh, and a man, he's got ilm and all of that, does not necessarily mean that he's the right fit for your daughter or the right fit for your for yourself. It does not necessarily mean that. That's why we look at other important qualifications, whether we're talking about level of education, job, personality, culture, physical needs, physiological needs, looking at the character, all of that, the family expectations, children expectations, legal considerations and documents. All of those things can be it can be a good, let's say, support, or can sometimes make the marriage even harder. Whether we're talking about maybe a big difference in level of education, this can be a very big problem. Job, she's a doctor and he's probably a school teacher, barely making $4,000, and she's probably making 7 and 8. Okay, then hey, we're talking about a different level of income right there. Then she's going to be coming in, hey, I'm making all the money, I'm basically paying everything, and she's going to feel that she's got the upper hand, and therefore that she has the right to make the important decision making, because she would feel that, hey, I'm contributing in the most wealth here. Then we're speaking about an issue and a factor that might bring in disagreements within the marriage. Culture is a bit, or personality. If she's basically, a woman that is maybe a strong personality, she's the eldest of her brothers and sisters, usually, of course, very authoritative. They've got a certain personality that comes with it. Sorry, I'm not here attacking every single older sister, but we know, it's quite interesting. They actually do these studies about middle brothers and sisters and the eldest brothers and sisters, and how their personality basically tends to be in a certain character, and the youngest ones and what kind of a character they're at. And it's quite interesting. So you're looking at a comedian, you're looking at the younger ones. If you're looking at somebody that is an authoritative person, a leader, you're talking about the eldest. If you're talking about the middle ones, they're usually the most successful, ironically. But we're talking about statistics. The middle ones tend to be the most successful, because they tend to know how to hold their anger, because of they would learn the different tactics and basically the different things that they would learn from the older brothers and sisters, and also they get to be the ones responsible for the younger brothers and sisters and so forth. But we're not just talking about in terms of where they're at within the numbers of brothers and sisters, but we're also talking about other traits of personality. There's you could see different books on that. So I'm not a psychologist here, but I think a number of different good psychology books that tell you about personalities, that tell you about people's behaviors, etc. But let me tell you one thing. Yes, it's interesting, but sometimes we may be overthinking. What do I mean by that? Sometimes some women may be overthinking in terms of how they analyze that personality, and they think they got it all. But, human beings are the most complex things to analyze and study. You can study perhaps maybe gold, silver, and it will give you the same results if you were to probably see the boiling, when it boils and when it melts, and when it basically the density of it and all of these different things. It's so easy to put it just, on a number. But human beings, the way that all of these different experiences, all of these environmental factors, all of these different things, and how they blend in a certain person, it completely is different from one person to another. So that doesn't mean every older brother or sister is going to be authoritative. And that certainly doesn't mean every younger brother or sister is going to be spoiled. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. Okay. So you have to keep in mind that the dynamic that it basically blends in person A is completely different than person B. And therefore, just keep in mind that these rules and these statistics that would talk about people's personalities don't necessarily make it seem as if it is the Quran, and here it is, I'm going to be estimating that this person's spoiled, or this person is this, or if this person basically has a degree of this, that means they're understanding. Not necessarily. I always say, having money does not mean that that person is hospitable, and having high degrees, PhDs, masters, whatever it is, it does not mean understanding. And being a person of ilm, Islamic studies, ilm, sharia, a person that is delivering khutbahs on the pulpit, does not mean religious. Okay, just keep that one in mind. Okay, so when we look at personality, that's more of character. Study it, see how it basically unfolds. That person's anger, that person's temper management, that person's perseverance, that person's capability to really be a man. There is a whole lecture that I talked about in terms of what really is the Quran defines as manhood. So check it out, inshallah. Culture. Culture, of course, we talked about this before, but the more distant the geographical spaces and the different cultures, basically, you would see whether language, accent, and of course, and what they mean, food, expectations, all of that basically gets within culture. So I would always recommend marry somebody that is closer, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee if you were to marry from your own culture, that doesn't guarantee that a successful marriage, but it sure is a very important ingredient. Okay, it's an important ingredient. Let's say we are from different cultures. What would help us in, let's say, making this marriage be successful? Number one thing is knowing the borders of what Islam considers as a border is key. Because if it's not within if it's not within, let's call it the boundaries, and it is within the parameter of it's permissible, or there are differences of opinions between scholars, or there are different interpretations, then that's what I want you to be inclusive and recognize that that don't be so fanatic about a certain view, or fanatic about a certain interpretation, or fanatic about your own culture, and just be inclusive, be tolerant, because hey, cultures are really people's experiences. Now you're developing a new experience. Just be inclusive and recognize to basically include both cultures, include your culture, his culture. It's okay to discuss cultures, but you want to keep in mind that certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created women as more compromising than men. Okay, so ladies, remember that piece. It's basically a very important ingredient. I'm not saying be compromising everything, but I'm saying if it's not haram, hey, just be compromising, because it is a very important ingredient to make your marriage successful. I know the feminist women are going to stand up and say, no, why her compromise and why not the man compromise? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the women to be more compromising, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically ordered the women to be فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically described the Muslim women, described the pious women as that they are qanitat. What is al-qanita? Al-qanita basically has two different interpretations between scholars. One, qanita to mean she has religious integrity, and qanita that she has integrity towards her husband. In other words, a form of obedience. Okay, just wanting to put that out there. Okay, so when we talk about compromising, definitely I would also tell the men out there as well, and I would say, hey, sometimes you also have to be compromising and understand, especially if it's talking about an emotional compromise at certain times, and it probably embracing her in that way, then definitely still understand that she also has her inclinations, just like you want her to embrace your inclinations. It would definitely be wise to also include those inclinations, because happy wife makes a happy life. Just remember that as an ingredient, and you'll probably make your marriage happy too. So just like I would tell the woman, please be compromising, I would also tell the man, happy wife makes a happy life. So just make you keep that one in mind. Physical needs. In terms of physical needs, of course, it's important, definitely. Remember the DNAIM rule, the deen, the nafs, the aql, the ird, the mal. That's the same thing when we talk about the keys to basically making a successful marriage. We will talk about the deen, the nafs. That's the nafs piece of it. Okay, so when we speak about level of education, we're talking about job, personality, culture. That really sometimes I would say would be within the border of deen and how they would have a certain vision in life. You might say, how does the job actually play a role in this? Certainly. because the job itself is going to affect a person and what type of personality that they may develop, what kind of vision that they would see in life, etc., without you realizing. A person that probably is a judge is completely different than a person that is probably a school teacher, okay? Or probably a person that is, I don't know, customer representative, sales representative. Every single job, it would basically give you certain personalities and certain strengths and certain weaknesses, and it would strengthen certain weaknesses and basically affect your personality differently. So a person that is a business person is expected to be an extrovert. A person that is a teacher expect to be an extrovert. A person that is probably maybe an author expected to be an introvert. A person that is probably a scientist, they're working within their lab, etc., maybe an ambivert, etc. So at the end, we're not necessarily using a classification of introvert as, introvert and extrovert as the final thing, because there's a whole discussion even in psychology whether we can classify people that way or not. So that was one theory for that Swedish psychologist, but that doesn't mean that we cannot develop new skills. Certainly that wasn't necessarily the classification that back in the days that they had used. They considered that, hey, you need to learn the skill of dealing with people, and that was basically it, okay? In other words, social skills. But we can say that certain people, even from the Sahaba, you saw certain Sahaba that were, more on the introverted side, like Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, and other Sahaba that were extroverted, like Umar ibn al-Khattab. They dealt and had very good social skills out there, but then you had others that were different. Anyhow, to make the story short, when we're speaking about job, we're talking about personality, we're talking about all of that. That's also within the area. Remember, just because something is halal, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the ingredient to a successful marriage. So now we're going to the physical needs. Remember the nafs, okay? In terms of nafs, it's very important to keep in mind health and the impact it has on marriage. Let me just pause for a second. It happens often that sisters would come to me and they would tell me perhaps the wife is having maybe certain issues, maybe fibrosis, or probably certain health issues that is basically obstructing, let's say, whether we're speaking about intimacy or whether we're speaking about marriage itself and her ability maybe to do as what he's expecting. He basically had seen his mother was healthy. She would work and the house is spick and span. Everything is spotless. And she's doing everything, taking care of everything. But then this wife, she basically probably may have diabetes and may have maybe anemia is temporary, unless it was something that what was a chronic illness, then that's a different story. But to look at the health of that person is extremely important, because it may and it will have a huge impact on the relationship. So for example, if we're talking about any illness, definitely do your homework. Right now, you've got ChatGPT to ask, well, does it impact a relationship? What does this look like, etc.? You've got many resources. Before you get into a relationship, read about it. Read the implication of it. How does it affect our relationship? Things to look into that are very common. Number 1, diabetes. 2, heart problems. 3, cholesterol. 4, different STDs. Those are extremely important to look into. extremely important to look into, because especially if we're talking about men, prostate problems, we're talking about perhaps liver problems, liver function, kidney, etc., all of these different things. I'm not telling you, yeah, we're going to go and actually make a physical exam, which I see no problem with, but some people may be sensitive about it. I don't want to be too utopian, okay? But I will say, disclosing this to each other is fair, to make sure that the other person is understanding the rules and the responsibilities that they are expected to deal with. This is extremely important. And of course, same thing goes with the wife. If we're talking about same thing, diabetes, cholesterol problems, and certainly other maybe things like fibrosis, things like endometriosis. I can't always say that name. Different, let's say, severe bleeding, long period days, etc. All of that can affect the relationship, and therefore it's important to disclose this. When do we disclose it? Do we disclose it in the engagement before the marriage contract, after the marriage contract? You would disclose it once you make the initial consent. What do we mean by initial consent? So let's say person A and person B. Person A came to ask for the hand of person B. So, of course, person A is the man and person B is the woman. Okay, now, should the woman disclose everything from day one? I would not recommend that. I would say not until you basically get, let's say, in further details to make sure you check the person's background, make sure that he's a person of religion, make sure that he's a person that you pretty much would approve his mannerisms, his akhlaq, etc. And once you had done your background check, or your wali had done the background check, that's when you can probably then say, that's when you would go for stage 2 to say, okay, well, there's some certain things that I would like to lay out here. Do I lay out everything? No, you don't lay out everything. You lay out major things. Okay. You lay out major things that will affect the marriage. So things like, for example, we're talking about maybe major illnesses that impact the marriage. That's a different story. Okay. You would lay that out. Same thing for the man. He would lay out this and say, hey, I've got this disease and this is the impact it has. Please read about it and see if you're capable of, surviving with such a case. Same thing for the woman. To lay out what that means in the relationship and how it will impact. And this is what I have. This is what you have. Now, previous, let's call them mis-akhlaq, wrong behaviors, wrong akhlaq. Do not disclose that. That's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Do not disclose that. One day, you were addicted to 1, 2, 3. Do the repentance, and no need to disclose that. No need whatsoever. Okay? Let's say, in terms of how much to disclose, what if something is not chronic? So we're talking about, sometimes you would get episodes of this or that, for example. Well, if there's a difference between an episode of a seizure, for example, that you will be getting, and between an episode of, hey, I would get, let's say, moments of getting a flu, or if everybody gets that, you don't have to disclose that. And my flu gets really bad, you don't have to disclose that. That's Sahih. We basically vary. That's not a big deal. But if we're talking about maybe episodes of bipolar, and where you need to get medicated, oh, this is a serious matter. Or maybe episodes maybe your body flaring a certain pimples or certain skin diseases or whatever it is, then in that situation, they have the right to know that. So even if it's episodes and not necessarily chronic, Okay, at the end of the day, those episodes, they would be needing to prepare for it. So what's going to determine whether this is something that I have to disclose or not have to disclose, I would say your knowledge about it and your integrity. There isn't a definitive thing where we would say, disclose this or disclose that. That's your take. And that's basically your integrity about one, how you know your illness and how it affects the relationship and how it affects your personality as well. If, let's say, it's affecting your personality and where it makes you get into these low or at least some temper issues, then in that situation, I would say, okay, this is going to affect it. Or it's probably requiring more patience and probably pitching in more in-house work and etc. And you're going to need more involvement and compromise from the man or from the wife. Then in that situation, I would say, I think it's fair to disclose this piece of information. Then in that situation, we would say it's your integrity and your take on how this impacts the relationship in how it determines basically the importance of talking about it before the marriage contract. After the marriage contract, you're a little bit too late. Okay, physiological needs. And what I mean by physiological needs, there are certain things that are expected of you as a wife. Of course, from one culture to another, it's different, but there are certain things that are expected of you. So therefore, it's important to say, well, this is what I would expect. This is, let's say somebody is paralyzed. Okay, well, definitely, paralysis is not going to be something to hide, but I think it's important to say, well, this is the implication. I may need, for example, certain suppositories to help me use the bathroom. I may need certain hygiene support, certain assistance in this and that. This is all of these different things are basically physiological needs that may be expected from the husband or the wife. And it would be important to disclose that because he's going to be or she's going to be the person to basically be your assistance or your assistant, or basically what kind of assistance is expected of me. And like I said before, there are certain needs, maybe incontinence, that can have a very important issue and very important, let's say, implications on the relationship. I've had a couple of marriages actually fall out and break because of incontinence and because of also having urination, basically, what do they call that? Involuntary urination during the night. And I've had a couple of marriages fall out. Of course, the people on the outside, they would just think they went into a disagreement. But the truth of the matter is that this was, let's call it, the deal breaker. Okay. So all of these from one person to another can be a deal breaker. It depends on the person. Okay. Each and every single one can be a deal breaker. You would have to determine, and therefore it's very important that there would be this transparent conversation where you understand the obstacle or the disease or whatever it is, and you would understand the implication and what is expected of you. Okay. Because this can be a deal breaker, even if the person was great in their deed. Don't feel, and this is a very common misunderstanding, that someone might think that if somebody is of good deen, and let's say they had serious physical needs, okay, that, oh, he's of good deen and therefore and good akhlaq and therefore I would have to accept. Not too fast. No, not too fast. Because that issue is going to be of a serious issue that you have the right that it would be disclosed, and you have the right to recognize whether you are capable of dealing with it or not. Let me give you an example to that. there was a Sahabiya, she was married to Thabit ibn Qais, okay? Her name is Fatima bin Chammas. Let me explain the story about her. Thabit ibn Qais was, remember that ayah when it was revealed, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهروا له بالقول كجهر بعضكم لبعض أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. So Thabit ibn Qais, what does this ayah mean? Do not raise your voice over the Prophet ﷺ, over the Prophet ﷺ's voice. So basically, whether we're speaking about a hadith or the Prophet ﷺ himself present, you should not raise your voice. Okay, أن تحبط أعمالكم. All your good deeds would basically be erased. Okay, وأنتم لا تشعرون. You wouldn't feel it, and that's why you had the Salihin, you had the ulama. They would be saying a hadith, and a snake would fall over it. And a snake would fall over their head, and they would just be so calm and so serene because they didn't want to be included in this ayah. Even if a snake would fall over their head. Why? Because when I speak and when I say a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, I would respect the Prophet ﷺ even when he's absent. Anyhow, so Thabit ibn Qais, he had a high voice, and his voice was very loud by nature. When this ayah was revealed, he thought it was referring to him. So what did Thabit ibn Qais do? He basically stayed in his house, did not leave, because he was afraid that this ayah was including him and referring to him, that he basically lacked iman and lacked religious integrity because his voice was naturally high. But then the Prophet ﷺ calls for Thabit. Thabit, he was afraid to come to the Prophet ﷺ because he was worried that the Prophet ﷺ was going to announce that Thabit was a munafiq. So Thabit, he was so concerned, and he said, okay, this ayah, here it is. It's going to be announcing that I'm a hypocrite. So that's when the Prophet ﷺ said, go call him and tell him, Thabit, Thabitun fil Jannah. Thabit is steadfast, in other words, firm in Jannah. Thabit, not only did he have a high voice, but he was extremely short. His wife, she came to the Prophet ﷺ and said this, and she said, Thabit, that she said, لا أعيب عليه لا في خلق ولا في دين. Said, I don't complain of his mannerisms and not his piety. It's, hey, he's the man that the Prophet ﷺ said, Thabit, Thabitun fil Jannah. You can't get a better endorsement than that. And she said, but I would hate الكفر في الإسلام إلا أني أكره أن أعود إلى الكفر في الإسلام. She would hate to become a kafir in Islam. Wait a minute. So what? She's afraid to become a kafir? No, it's not literal. This is metaphorical. Because she recognized the duties that she has towards her husband, she considered that, I would hate to not be on the level of a good pious woman, and therefore be closer in my mannerisms to a disbelieving woman. Why? Because she knew that a believing woman is supposed to have good akhlaq and be obedient to her husband. In another hadith, it said that she had said that I had seen Thabit amongst the men, and because of his shortness, she considered that he lacked manhood. He wasn't as manly as the other guys. Hey, they were big, tall, they were basically appearing too masculine. And she said, I didn't want that. And another hadith that basically had given another reason that she basically hated his nose. I don't know, whatever. So at the end, we just know it was the appearance. We just know it was the appearance because she said it straightforward that his deen was in place, his akhlaq were in place, but she hated basically that. So when we look at that, when we're speaking about the physiological needs, we're talking about appearance, we're talking about all of that, looks, character, basically having an impact on the relationship. And certainly it's important to keep that within the context. Family expectations, in-laws, how much of intervention and how much of that interference do they have? That's also to take it in consideration. Certain Asian cultures, in-laws tend to actually intervene a lot more. I don't know about the dynamic of their relationship, but certainly we're talking about certain cultures may have more of in-law intervention than others. Other cultures, even in the Middle East, you may have deep in-law intervention that sometimes go a little bit too far. So that you probably want to take it in consideration, because I'm not saying, don't get married within those types of families, because sometimes they can be a good bond. They can be a good family support, but sometimes it could also come in with a whole headache depending on the other person's personalities, and somebody seeing you as a competitor, somebody seeing you as basically needing to live a certain expectations or needing to do certain things. And then, it becomes a certain competition, or it becomes certain, sometimes feeling that, hey, you're getting too close within my boundaries. And then it becomes an area of drama. And then this drama develops into a trauma. And then it develops into severe tensions that can make this marriage fall out. So those are things you want to say, do I have my separate home? Do I have my separate space? Do they consider separate spaces? So you really got to have, I would say, this good understanding of your own situation, and also understanding of their situation, in order to say, are you capable of being, let's say, pious, holding your religion, holding your, let's call it, your temper, and being yourself in that dynamic? So that would be something that you would really have to keep in mind. I definitely recommend, and because we will get into that every wife has her right to have her own separate home where no one else is sharing with her. So we're not talking about an in-law, whether a mother-in-law, sisters-in-law, whatever it is, but she has her own space, to have her own separate space. Okay, so needing to mention that one. Children expectations, whether we're speaking about, is he expecting too many children? Is he okay with perhaps, is she or is he okay with perhaps maybe contraceptives, using contraceptives? And we already know that tying the tubes, unless for medical reasons, is not permissible. So we're not talking about permanent, but we're talking about temporary. Okay, children expectations. Definitely Islam encourages that one would marry somebody that is fertile, but there are certain cases where perhaps somebody that is not fertile, somebody that doesn't want children, is probably the best option. Okay, so that's a different situation. Legal considerations and documents. Legal considerations, maybe their legal documents, they don't have the legal documents to live in this country or live in that country or whatever. That can be a major obstacle. Then in that situation, if things cannot be figured out, well, can we figure something else out? Can we live in a different country, etc.? What are we going to be compromising? And I would say one thing for the sisters living in the US, certainly, and or even European countries, it's very common that, I'm not saying don't look into the legal documents, but I would say if you have a marriage if you accepted this marriage and you already know, let's say he doesn't have the marriage, let's say the legal documents, that you already accepted that, don't continuously brag about his legal documents. And if you already accepted the marriage, then why are you bragging about it? Why are you now remembering to accuse the intention that he's marrying you for legal documents and for the citizenship or whatever. Now that the marriage is at place, the marriage has taken place, the marriage is going, make it work. And certainly bragging about the legal documents after a marriage had taken place will not make it work, because it will just bring in sentiments of anger, of animosity, of accusations left and right, and it will not make the marriage work. But before the marriage takes place, then if this person doesn't have the legal documents, I'm not sure whether this person really is marrying me for the legal documents to just get a citizenship or not. I'll tell you, well, it's fair. It's a fair question. I don't know. I don't know if this person has a religious integrity, whether he's marrying you for the papers or not. It's a fair question before the marriage. But to raise these questions and continuously raise this as an argument after the marriage, you're not making the marriage work. You're basically just fueling fire and sparking it to make it not work. Just a note. Okay. Inshallah. Let me answer the question on the other end. Let's see. If these women were close women, aunts. Okay, sorry about that. I didn't see it, but no. Let's see right there. Hold on. Oh dear. Hold on. Let me see the questions. There's a question. They actually put, if a woman gets married again but has a son from a previous marriage, if later on the son grows up and gets married, is his wife a mahram for the stepfather? The wife? No. Because the ayah basically says حلائل أبنائكم الذين من أصلابكم. Okay? الذين من أصلابكم. So this is talking about basically relating to an actual, it was really clear that the woman that is a mahram onto that man is basically the wife that is married to his own biological son, not his stepson. The ayah was really clear about it. Yes, there is a recording. So yeah, inshallah, we'll put out the recording out there, inshallah. So if there are any questions, inshallah, you can unmute yourselves, and hopefully, inshallah, I'll be able to answer it. You can unmute yourselves, that's okay. I guess no one wants to unmute themselves and ask that, or you can write it in the chat, that's okay too. Yes, it is recorded. It is recorded. The whole thing is recorded, and I will put out the recording, inshallah. So I'll end the recording right now, and I'll end the live stream.